In our story, we've been taken on this journey in the story of Deborah and Barak, is back to the times of the judges when we had this bloodshed and violence marked by a lack of leadership in the nation. And as such, due to their lack of faith and following God, God sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, and delivered them into the hands of their enemies, who mightily oppressed them until they turned to God for help. And God, through the work of Deborah, an inspired leader, saw that the nation was failing to step up, saw that the leadership wasn't there, but who through her support motivated them to then motivated a man by the name of Barak to stand up to motivate others to call them to the truth, and who then responded in giving and taking back their inheritance. And God, willing and able, was able to work with anybody, as Barak was going to find with the work of Jael. And if we truly trust him and give ourselves voluntarily in service unto him, God will use us and bring about his purpose, and will motivate others by our service to help bring about his purpose. And so Deborah and Barak, now fully inspired as they watched the nation of Israel respond to take back the territory of Jabin, king of Canaan, they're going to sing this song, having secured all the territory previously lost due to their faithless parents' leadership. They opened their mouth now to praise their God and to praise the people who had offered themselves in the service of the truth. Deborah's song. So Deborah's going to sing a song with Barak. It's a duet that they sing, but they sing together in different parts. But we can't exactly tell who's singing what at what point, right? But we know that Deborah sings at times on her own, because she sings in verse 7 that I, Deborah, arose. So there are going to be parts of the song that Deborah's going to be singing herself, but there's definitely parts that Barak's going to be involved in as the bass, all right? And so it's a song of praise, a praise to God for what he's accomplished. It's going to be a song of thanks to the brethren who volunteered and jeopardized their lives. It's going to be a song of reprimanding those who refused and ignored to help their brothers and sisters in need. It's going to be a song of blessing, where Jael is blessed for her courage and zeal. And it's going to be a song of petition, requesting that God's enemies might be annihilated amongst out of the people that hate him. And so when we break down the song, we can sort of break down the song into these sections, where verse 2 is the introduction and the theme of what the whole thing was all about. Verses 3 to 5 is going to be the story of the power of God's presence. It's going to, as Deborah steps back and looks at the whole thing, she sees it as a repeat of history, something that's happened in times gone by. She sees the whole thing all over again in the context, obviously, as they march out of Egypt. She's going to see the context of the battle and the devastating environment that shouldn't have been there in the first place. She's going to then bless those that volunteer. She's going to then curse the slackers. She's going to bless Jael, and then she's going to picture the destruction of what was going to be unleashed upon Sisera's mother and her wise ladies, and then a plea for God's ongoing support as they continued to seize their inheritance. So that's really the breakdown of the song of Deborah and Barak. So now let's start to work through. We've sort of got this base that we've built over our last three studies on what went in the battle. But I want now to step back with Deborah and Barak in their minds and to see how all of this unfolds as Deborah sees it. So she starts with her song in verse 2. Praise ye Yahweh for the avenging of Israel, when the people willingly offered themselves. So if you've got a coloured pencil, this theme that's going to come back is going to come back a couple of times. Verse 2, when the people willingly offered, it's going to be there in verse 9. My heart is toward the governors of Israel that offered themselves willingly, right? So this whole song is going to be about volunteers, people that give in the service of the truth. But when she says, praise ye Yahweh for the avenging of Israel, it's actually better translated for the revealing of leadership. And you wonder why we've called this series, this whole series is about inspiring lessons in leadership, because I think Deborah sees it this way. For the revealing of leadership, for the volunteering of the people. And Deborah in her song is going to make a connection between what leadership is all about and the spirit of becoming volunteers. She's going to show that leadership was seen amongst individuals and amongst people who gave in service to the truth. And so when she sings really about the revealing of leadership in Israel, for the volunteering of the people, as she says. See, Deborah saw these two things go hand in hand together as the victory was accomplished. So she wants to thank God that in the space of this leadership vacuum that wasn't there in the nation, she sees that God had provided support to the leaders that stood up, that volunteered amongst his people to bring about his purpose. She's going to sing a song, and so both of them are going to sing the song of thankfulness to God for what he did in the lives of these people. And the spirit with which they gave, they willingly offered themselves. You see, it was when leadership was restored and demonstrated faithful examples of courage that stood up. What happened, says Deborah, is it stirred a response amongst the rest of the people that were around them. And they all then stood up and willingly gave for the help of the service of the truth. But brothers and sisters and young people, I want you to notice, they didn't just volunteer. Look at the spirit with which they did this. They volunteered what? They volunteered their lives. They willingly offered, it says, themselves. Can you see that? They willingly offered themselves. If you hold the hand here, turn over the page, she's going to tell us what that was. Verse 18 of Judges chapter 5. She says, Zebulun and Naphtali were a people that jeopardized their lives unto the death in the high places. That's what this was about. She didn't just see that people put their hand up and said, yeah, I'll come and put the tables out. These were the people that were willing to give their lives for their brothers and sisters. That's the spirit that she was so impressed with. You see, Deborah, Barak, and Jael's example had inspired others to stand up and join in the fight to eradicate all of Jabin's army and seek to restore the control of the territory they'd stolen for them. And they were prepared to put their lives on the line for their brothers and sisters. But I want you to notice, by the way, who Deborah and Barak want this song to be sung in the ears of. Look what it says, verse 3. Who are they singing the song to? Hear, O ye kings. Give ear, O ye princes. Now, brothers and sisters, we know that there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. So who are they singing this song to? We see, I think, they're talking to all the neighboring kings and all the neighboring princes to sit there and say, you're next. This is coming to your backyard. So whilst we might have destroyed Jabin, king of Canaan, and whilst we might have taken our inheritance in Naphtali, guess what? This is coming to you. This spirit, if this continues, we're going to take back everything. You guys listen real carefully, because this is a tent peg is reserved for you too. See, Barak had led the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun, among others, amongst Jabin and Sisera. But now Deborah and Barak are to sing this song to try and inspire all the other tribes to finish the mission that they had all failed to fulfill in Joshua 23 and Judges chapter 1, to seize their inheritance there completely with the Spirit. You see, Deborah and Barak wanted the kings and the princes of the Philistines, the Canaanites, the Zidonians, the Hivites, the Jebusites to be on notice, because their days were also numbered if the Spirit would continue. You know, that's the proof for that, brothers and sisters, is turn to the very last verse of Deborah's and Barak's song. Because she says at the very end of her song, so let all thine enemies perish, O Yahweh, and let them that love him be as the sun when it goes forth in his might. You see, they wanted all of God's enemies to be perished, to gone, to be disappeared. All them that love him to shine like the sun going forth in his might, this brilliant, glorious destruction to melt any oppression amongst the nation. And all those that love him were going to be all those that had been led and all those that had volunteered. She wanted this spirit to be maintained. She wanted all of the kings of the Canaanites to know that their time was numbered. And you know that because they're singing to Yahweh Elohim of Israel, you see, the covenant memorial title of God, that God would bring about his promises to the faithful fathers of old to protect them from all destruction. He who will be the mighty ones that will be princes with Israel. And so now they address God himself. Verse 4, Yahweh, when thou wentest out of Seir, when thou marchest out of the field of Edom, the earth trembled, the heavens dropped, the clouds also dropped water. The mountains melted from before Yahweh, even from Sinai before Yahweh, Elohim of Israel. Now see, I think Deborah and Barak now want to paint a picture of what had happened as God arrived at Mount Tabor. She says, I just stood there on the mountain and I just saw God arrive just in front of me. And do you know what it reminded me of, says Deborah? Do you know what it reminded me of as we stood at the top of this mountain? Wow, if we'd been there only a few years before, I think we would have found, well, just like Moses did, that God appeared at Mount Sinai in exactly the same way. I see it the same, she says. Come back to Deuteronomy 33. This is where she's quoting from. She's quoting straight out of Moses' song. Look at who Deborah thinks she sees and reminds herself that the moment of Mount Tabor, when God arrived and unleashed his destruction on Sisera, she said, the echoes in the story of Moses in his own blessing remind me of that moment. I just felt like I was back there, she says. Look what it says in Deuteronomy 33. This is the blessing, verse 1. Wherewith Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death, and he said, Yahweh came from Mount Sinai. He rose up from Seir unto them. He shined forth from Mount Paran. He came with 10,000 of his saints, and from his right hand went a fiery law for them. Yea, he loved the people. All his saints are in thy hand. They sat down at thy feet. Every one shall receive of thy words. And so Deborah says it was just like back then when God marched the people out of the children out of the land of bondage and brought them to the Mount Sinai, and God revealed his glory, gave them his law, and then they marched toward the promised land. It was remarkable, she says. And so she says the dramatic weather events that we saw in our time in Judges chapter 4 absolutely reminded me of that moment. And brothers and sisters, she sees Israel with the 10,000 of his saints. Oh, she says, now I understand why you asked me to get 10,000 men. Oh, now I get why you wanted me to bring 10,000 of God's saints to the top of Mount Tabor and charge on foot down into the valley. I know, she says. I understand. We're doing this all again. We are coming to seize our inheritance. Deborah and Barak see what's transpired as a reenactment of God emerging forth from Mount Sinai and marching up the wilderness to take their inheritance. You see, she sees the similarities between the Exodus and herself absolutely clearly. The people's deliverance from bondage and oppression, just like coming out of Egypt. The reluctance of a leader to respond, just like Moses. The support that would be provided by the Kenites through the work of Jael, just like Hobab and Jethro. The deliverance from Pharaoh's horsemen and chariots, just as God had done in the Red Sea. The chariots being rendered useless by the water that cascades, just like Pharaoh's destruction. God's promise of deliverance prior to the events, just as he had promised. And the complete and utter destruction, the quote unquote from Exodus chapter 14, verse 28, it says, when they looked in the morning, behold, all of Pharaoh's things, chariots and horsemen, there was not a man left, just like we had, she says. It's remarkable. See, Deborah and Barak saw all of this as a repeat of Yahweh's majestic deliverance of his people and the establishment of his kingdom and the law and order amongst his people to establish their inheritance once more. It's just like that, she says. Except for this, she says. Come back into Judges chapter 4. When I look back at our little patch, she says, it wasn't anything like that at all. Look what she says in verse 6. You'd expect to see this remarkable story, but instead, we had chaos. Absolute chaos. It was so bad, she says. There was no one to be seen. In the days of Shamgar, the son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were unoccupied. There's no one around. In fact, it's worse than that. It's like anyone who wanted to travel went through the goat tracks of that country. You wouldn't expect to see that, would you? Not after this. It was chaos, she says. We should have had so much more, but we didn't. And whilst there were people standing up to try and be faithful, to give to God and service and to inspire the nations, it didn't work. It wasn't working. Shamgar, the son of Anath, which slew at the end of chapter 3, 600 men with an ox goad and delivered Israel. He said no one followed him. Even Jael, when she destroyed Sisera, it was like no one was actually following her in her faithfulness until that moment. There were faithful people, but they weren't standing up and supporting her or him. It was so bad, she says, that all leadership in the nation had ceased. The inhabitants of the villages ceased. They ceased in Israel. There was no one, she said, until Deborah arose, a mother in Israel. You see, Deborah had seen the need for leadership. People of faith were trying to stand up, but the people were being unresponsive. Why were they being unresponsive, she says? Do you know why? She says, because of idolatry. It was pretty simple. There's a real simple problem. You see, verse 8 says, they chose new gods. Instead, they disregarded the law that was under Moses' arm and the warning of Deuteronomy 32. And as a result of that, we didn't have God's fiery law under our arm. No, we had war in the gates. The gates we should have possessed, according to Genesis 22. We lost the whole lot, she says. It was disaster. So she says, was there even a spear or a shield seen amongst the 40,000 in Israel? Was there anything to be seen? There was war. Absolute war and chaos, she says. There were no weapons of war to be found amongst 40,000. Oh, brothers and sisters. Amongst 40,000? Where is she quoting from? Why that number? So, brothers and sisters, I think she's quoting from Joshua chapter 4. Have a look at this. This is remarkable. Joshua chapter 4 and verse 13. Come back with me to there. Here's where she's quoting for. And look, as Israel stood at the borders of the Jordan River, as they were about to cross the river Jordan, it says, verse 10, the priests which bear the ark, they stood in the midst of Jordan till everyone had passed over. They came to pass, verse 11, when the people were passed over, that the ark went off. And who followed immediately the ark straight after? Well, it's the tribes that were going to remain on the east side of Jordan. Okay? Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. There was going to be those tribes that were going to remain. But you know what? They're going to show by their example, because they'd had a conversation with Moses and said, we're going to stay on this side if that's okay, but we promise we'll come with you, and we're going to help seize the inheritance on behalf of every other tribe of the nation. And you know what it says in verse 12? It says those the children of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, it says that passed over armed before the children of Israel as Moses had spoken unto them. About 40,000 prepared for war. If you've got my margin in the Oxford, it says they were armed, ready armed for war to pass over. 40,000 of them to seize their inheritance. And here they were with shields and swords and spears going to seize their inheritance. He says, it was like in our day. They weren't there. And we didn't have one spear or one shield. Not one. We couldn't be seen. That's how bad it was in our time. As a result of faithless leadership and the consequences of idolatry, instead of taking the war to the tribes that were amongst them, the war had come to them. And they were totally and utterly unprepared and ill-equipped. Now, brothers and sisters, perhaps we might see why Deborah and Barak are so thankful to Yahweh for his support, for stirring up a remnant of the faithful to face this opposition. Because of this leadership vacuum, it was such a remarkable thing that some stood up to show their care and show their support and give of their lives to serve him. So who were these people? Who were these volunteers? Well, she says, my heart is toward the governors of Israel that offered themselves willingly among the people. Bless ye Yahweh, she says. My heart, she says, is towards the governors of Israel. The word for governor is the word to cut, to engrave, or to inscribe, or to mark out. It's better translated the lawgivers. These are the lawgivers, the ones who had copied the law. It's the same word in verse 14 of this chapter, in Judges chapter 5, which gives more detail, which is those that handled the pen. These were the Bible students, the scribes, the ones like Ezra, who recorded the history of the nation. But in that record, they understood their Bible. They had worked through all of the things that had happened to the nation of Israel and were cognizant of God's blessing amongst the nation and how he'd worked. These are the guys that had kept the record and the history and wrote out the law and expounded its message to its people. That was what was driving these people. They understood what God was all about. These governors, it says, put down their pens to pick up swords for the sake of the truth. And they did this to stand up for what was right, to stand up against Sisera and against Jabin and against the army, to fight and finally rid the surrounding tribes of the residue of Jabin's iron grip and restore the land and its territories that they'd lost. That was what they did because they understood the law and what was required. It only required somebody to lead that way, the mother of Israel, Barak to stand up and Jael to show, and they all came, says Deborah. These are the first ones that came, the Bible students, who knew who God was all about. And notice that magnificent spirit, she says. They offered themselves willingly. They provided their lives in sacrifice for their God and for their brethren. But I want you to notice something else amongst this people, amongst these governors. It says they offered themselves willingly among the people. And then, you know what that word in the Hebrew means? Among the people, it's the word for a unit or a congregation, brothers, sisters, and young people. This group came and gave themselves with one accord. And even though Hebrew's name might mean a community and a gathering, this was the true gathering, brothers and sisters, that came. They came with a common purpose, a common goal, and together they marched at Barak's request to assist in the destruction of all of Jabin's remaining territory, prepared to sacrifice their lives if they had been for the cause, both for Sisera's battle and for the remaining tribes. They gave up their all for this. And their spirit makes Deborah and Barak call out to everyone in Israel to look at their remarkable, wonderful example, attributing their freedom and praise to those who volunteered. Look at what she says next. I want everybody in Israel, anyone who's come from anywhere, to think about how they have become liberated. Look what she says next. Verse 10, speak ye that ride on white asses, and ye that sit in judgment and walk by the way. They that are delivered from the noise of archers and the places of the drawing of water, there shall they rehearse the righteous acts of Yahweh, even the righteous acts towards the inhabitants of the villages of Israel. Because then shall the people of Israel, people of Yahweh, go down to the gates. And there's a little bit of translation that a lot of people have sort of struggled in this particular section of the song. But I think this is what's going on when we boil it back. The message was really that she wants all of these classes of Israel, of Jewish society, to sing this song and to understand how they have become freed. Those that ride on white asses, these were the ones that rode costly animals. This is the Mr. Darcy's, right? Riding all the prim and proper horses and asses in the history of the nation, you know? And the other ones that were there were those that sit in judgment, right? The rich classes that rested on posh carpets. The idea for judgment is actually the word for garment. It's better translated garments. These are the ones you had to take your shoes off to go into their house. The costly carpets and rugs, the tapestry, right? How the heck did they get all of this ability to have this beautiful, wonderful freedom to be able to sit at home in the luxury of their environment? How do you get to drive the big fancy Rolls Royce down the road? How do you get to sit at home in your luxury palace? And for the rest of you flying economy class, right? Those that walk by the way, the lower classes, the poorer travelers that had to walk on foot with no shoes. Everyone in Israel has to sing this song, she says, and have to work out how you become free. And where are you going to sing this song? And the answer is you're going to sing it where everybody sings, where everybody gathers. It was the place of the drawing of water. And so perhaps this verse is actually better translated this way, pulled together from a bunch of different places, right? So from the sound of those who have been liberated at the watering holes, there they celebrate and recall the righteous acts of Yahweh, the righteous acts of the leaders in Israel. You see, what Deborah and Barak are singing about was the fact that actually they could all now freely walk out the gate of every city that they lived in and go down to the watering holes, which are always outside the city, where they chit-chat and talk about all the gossip of the city. She says, you know what you're going to do? You'll be actually able to get out the city and draw out of the wells. And while you're there, you're going to sing and talk about, how did you get this freedom? Now it's just because of the spirit of these governors. The whole nation, she says, has good reason to sit there and reflect on the leaders and the warriors who had returned home to consider just what God had accomplished for them, the mighty acts that Yahweh had performed, the wonderful example of those who have stood up, that had liberated them and given them freedom, that they could now meet together in peace. How does that happen, she says? Well, then shall the people of Yahweh go down to the gates. The people of Yahweh as they are now. The people of Yahweh that weren't the people of Yahweh. They had war on the gates before because they served wrong gods. Now they're unified together as an entire nation, as the people of Yahweh. And if you've got a pencil, just link the idea of the war in the gates of verse 8 to now the fact that they can go down as the people of Yahweh to the gates, verse 11, because they're free to do so, because war is no longer there. How have you become liberated, she says? Well, I'll tell you. She said it was because of leadership. It was because of what Yahweh had done. We want you to sing praise to Yahweh when we look at those who have responded. And so, verse 12, she says, awake, Deborah, and perhaps this is the bit that Barak sings, and she responds, awake, utter a song. Arise, you Barak, and lead thy captivity captive. And here we can see the yin and the yang of the song. And now they're going to talk about those that came and those that didn't. They're going to lead their captivity captive, but there are going to be those that came and those that did not. And so the call came, verse 12. Arise, awake, awake, utter a song. Arise, Deborah and Barak. Lead thy captivity captive, thou son of Abinoam. You see, awake, awake. They both had to shake themselves awake. This was the time for action. They were going to lead captivity captive, and Barak was going to lead those who had held them in captivity and take them captive. God's people had been held in captivity by Jabin and Sisera in this iron grip. And now the call came to take their captives captive. You know, in this expression, and we'll see this in our last class, it captures the remarkable work and type of what our Lord Jesus Christ accomplished in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 15. Delivered themselves who through fear of death were all their lifetimes subject to bondage. Hebrews 2, verse 15. We'll see that in our final study. But who does Barak lead? Who are the ones that responded? Well, verse 13 says, then he made him that remained. Oh, that's an interesting expression. Him that remained. Dear brothers and sisters, there's no difference in any other time in history. It was always a remnant that came. See, this is the remnant. The remnant, better translation. At that time, a remnant came to trample down the lords. A unified people of Yahweh came down to trample down the mighty ones. It was a faithful remnant who came and who volunteered and put their lives on the line to save their brethren. It has and always only ever will be a remnant of those who respond and those who remain faithful. It's the Levites of Exodus 32, the remnant of Israel. It's the Nethinim in the time of Nehemiah. It's Daniel and his three friends and the good figs out of the nation of Israel at the time of their captivity. It's the remnant of the exile who came. It's always only ever been a remnant, brothers and sisters. And it's the remnant of Bible students who come back to their Bible, who understand the power of God in their lives, who are the ones who are motivated to stand up. And so where did these people come from? What was their motivation? Why did they turn up? Well, verse 14 says, well, it wasn't all of Ephraim, but out of Ephraim there was a remnant, a root of them against Amalek after thee. So she's going to describe 4 tribes. The people who responded willingly, the Ephraimites, the Benjamites, the Manasseh who lived on the western side in the land of Israel, and Zebulun who's going to come. And so she's describing the ones who came. And it all began, she says, Barak and Deborah sang, it all began with the tribe of Ephraim, but only after a few of them, a root that came. There was a few of them who had been instrumental in seizing their own inheritance. Notice that? It was a root of them against Amalek. You see, these ones had understood the importance of rooting out the people in their territory. Ephraim had got rid of the rest of Amalek that were amongst them. These are the ones that understood the importance of finishing the job. Some stood up and done it. These are the ones who come. That's the warriors who had removed their own enemies from their own territories. These are the ones who stood up to eradicate the next lot of Canaanites. They saw the need and the benefits of removing and eradicating their enemies. These are the ones who are the first to fight against the Canaanites. Do you know what, says Deborah and Barak? It was their example of leadership and their experience that inspired and encouraged the next tribe who were right beside them to join and to respond. You notice that? After these, she says, Benjamin among thy people. So one group stood up that understood the importance of carrying out the mission. And they motivated an entire tribe. So Benjamin decided to join and to respond. And notice that. Benjamin among the people. Again, if you've got that, if you've got a coloured pencil, you colour in that expression, among the people, among the people. It's verse 9, verse 11, verse 13, verse 15, verse 14, and verse 18, right? Among the people. You want me to say those verses again? Verse 9, verse 11, the people. Verse 13, among the people. Verse 14, among thy people. And verse 18, a people. And don't forget, verse 2, praise ye Yahweh for the avenging of Israel when the people. So it's a unity, a unit group among the people. This is a unified bunch of Benjamites. They all come as a unit, says the record. So Ephraim's example, or the members of Ephraim, the inspirational fighters of Ephraim, motivate the tribe of Benjamin to stand up as a group, as a unit. Benjamin comes up, unified with one accord to assist their brethren. You see, not only had Ephraim's example encouraged Benjamin, who was immediately south of them, but it also inspired the half-tribe of Manasseh, who was next to them. So it says, out of Machir, this was the Manasseh of the western side. Only half, by the way, are going to respond. The other half are going to stay where they were. That's Gilead, verse 17. So the two half-tribes of Manasseh, Machir, one family on the western side, versus Gilead on the right-hand side, are going to respond entirely differently. But on the western side, those that were inside the land, these are the ones who are going to stand up, living right next to Ephraim. And so right beside them, in these tribes who lived south and beside, they all sort of talk, obviously, and stand up and come and go to fight against Jabin and to take back the territory. And also Zebulun. Out of Zebulun, the Bible students came, the governors. And out of Zebulun, them that handle the pen of the writer. The Bible students out of Zebulun come. And whilst not, brothers and sisters, necessarily rulers in their tribes, what we're being told, I think, from Deborah and Barak is that the example of Ephraim had inspired those who understood their history and understood the law and understood the need of what was to be done. But these are the ones that were motivated to stand up and respond willingly because they knew what the importance was and they were prepared to give their lives because they loved their brothers and sisters. You see, now perhaps we can appreciate just why Deborah and Barak's hearts and minds are so elevated to God, because they see that there is still a remnant who love God and love his appearing. See, this is what they were so encouraged by. And Deborah was inspired with this moment because she realizes that, you see, the cascading volunteered spirit was now taking hold of the nation. What had begun with a lack of leadership, she had stepped up and motivated Barak. Barak had motivated 10,000 men. 10,000 men had now motivated a whole lot of other people, and they came because they understood their need to serve God. Wow, it's amazing, she says. You see, the remarkable response of courageous leadership now had inspired many others. How could God not respond to that, says Deborah and Barak. It's just so remarkable. And you know, I think right there is a lesson for all of us. You know, and the question, the massive lesson that comes out of the story in the context of these is, how is our volunteering spirit to help each other going in the truth? What's driving us to respond? How do we respond when people stand up and call for help and assistance? Do we have the volunteering spirit that's needed in our ecclesias? Are we prepared to give our lives for our friends and for our brothers and sisters in the truth? And can we give more? I don't think it ever says in the Bible, here am I, send them. See, the spirit of these men was, here am I, send me. Here am I, send someone else, is what's written in an entirely different book. You see, leadership is all about service, isn't it, brothers and sisters? And it requires us to have the volunteering spirit, which comes from our understanding of God's word, the appreciation of God's gift to us, the sacrifice of His Son, and an understanding of the Bible and what He's done with so many other faithful. That's what should motivate us to love as we've been shown love, isn't it? See, to have that spirit of volunteers is to show our appreciation for what God has given us. It's a litmus test, isn't it? It's a litmus test. How much we give is a measure of how much we realise and receive, how much we realise and appreciate what God has given us. And in giving, doesn't that inspire others to give? Isn't that the truth? Isn't that how it works? It's when we stand up and we go, hey, can you help us? We're going to go and do this. And others are like, yeah, we'll come. That's how it works. We inspire each other through our examples. It enhances God's purpose when we stand up and show leadership. And it's not the lectern, it's the stuff behind the scenes. And we inspire others to serve by our example, who give willingly of, that's the fruitfulness, isn't it, of God's word working in our lives. You see, God's purpose is all about people, but it actually requires volunteers. And not everyone will respond. Not everyone can give, and not everyone will give. And it's the same in the story. And Deborah and Barak are now going to call out the slackers, the insensitive deserters, the slackers who choose not to come. You see, in their example, brothers and sisters, young people, is going to represent all the types of the excuses and the responses that people give as to why we can't do stuff. And here they are. Here's the people she calls out. Verse 15. So she says, look, for the divisions of Reuben, there are great thoughts of heart. Why are both there amongst the sheepfolds to hear the bleatings of the flocks? For the divisions of Reuben, there are great searchings of heart. And she says, the Reubenites. Let's talk about the Reubenites first of all. She says, the firstborn of Jacob's sons, the ones that crossed over the river Jordan when they first went to seize their inheritance, the ones girded with a sword to fight on behalf of their nation as they did in Joshua chapter 4. Where were they? And where to be found? You see, this was the first, the one, the head of all the tribes that now show an utter lack of leadership. And she gets stuck into them. She says, I know what went on in your story. She says, for the divisions of Reuben, there were great thoughts of heart. You know, the idea of thoughts were intentions or resolutions. These are the people that talked about coming. They resolved that they should come. It'll be a good idea, I think. But there were divisions. There were groups. There were differing opinions amongst the ecclesia. And the point is that Deborah and Barak had known that when Barak's request had come for extra help and support, they had meetings. Should we go? Would it be a good thing? Yes, I think the principles are aligned with the truth. I think we definitely should go. Oh, yes, but we've got our responsibilities at home. We've got our sheep that we've got to look after. We've got the sheepfolds that we're renowned for. We've got a great bunch of sheep that we've got to look out for. Maybe we should go, but we can't leave there. So how are we going to? And they had all these meetings, one after the other. And they never went. Instead, it says, they remained with the sheep. Reuben were renowned for their great pastures, their magnificent flocks. And whilst they wanted to help, and at least some of them wanted to do, life got in the way. Their own responsibilities were too important, and they actually never got around to helping their brethren. They wanted to, they actually intended to, but they failed to. And there, brothers and sisters, is the first lesson of ecclesial life, isn't it? Intention is an action. Intention, no matter how well endeavoured it is never action. The thought doesn't count. We've got to follow through and execute. They wanted to come, but they failed to respond. It was a disaster, she says. The leaders of the nation, who ought to be the ones there first, couldn't decide. And in the end, they never did decide. So she says, not only was it Reuben, that just cascaded through the nation. Gilead, it says, abode beyond Jordan. Gilead, Dan, and Asher, well, they didn't even have intentions to respond to the call. Gilead, it said, abode beyond Jordan. Dan remained in their ships, and Asher continued on the seashore and above in his breaches. Gilead, the other half tribe of Manasseh on the east side of Jordan. What was their excuse? Well, I think the fact that they were beyond Jordan, she says, is sort of maybe an insight into where they were thinking. It's quite a wee way for us to go. Like it's, 12 hours. We can't really afford petrol. It's a long way to come. We first have to work out how we're going to get across the river, and then we've got to think about how we're going to get there. Logistics is quite a lot. It's probably too far for us, really. It's not really affecting us either, by the way. It's not really our problem. We're on the other side of the river. Good luck. Dan, on the other hand, well, he remained in ships, it says. Yeah, their territory was in the north, which included the seaports and the coast of the Mediterranean. This tribe made their money out of living and fishing. Their livelihood was of more relevance to them. Sorry, the weather's perfect today. We're too busy. My job's taking me offshore. I'm sure you'll understand. Good luck. Brothers and sisters, their brethren were dying, and they were out fishing. They were too busy to help. It was disgraceful. Brothers and sisters, we could use the same mistake. We can follow the same excuse, can't we? Sorry, we're too busy. Oh, really? Asher, it says, continued on the seashore, abode in their breaches. These guys weren't even out in their boats. They just refused to come. It says that they continued. It means to dwell permanently. They didn't even get out. Asher just kept on doing what they were doing. Oh, you got a war again? Oh, good luck. Not really my problem. This is not affecting us. Life's quite perfect where we are. Go away. See, for these tribes, Deborah and Barak say they were either couldn't make a decision, it was too far to go, or life was too busy, or it's not their battle to fight. So therefore, ipso facto, none of this is my problem. And they never came. And you see, these tribes showed a complete disregard, an utter lack of care, and no concern whatsoever for the plight of their brothers and sisters. This in contrast, she says in verse 18, to the Zebulun and Naphtali, who as a group and unified people jeopardized their entire lives unto death in the high places of the field. She said you couldn't get a more stark contrast between these groups. See, brothers and sisters, the lesson for us is this. It's when we're busy that God tests us. It's when we're tired that God tries us. It's when we're stressed that we really truly come to see where we prioritize our responsibilities in the truth and how far we'll go to sacrifice for one another, isn't it? It's in those moments. We're defined in those moments, aren't we? Not when we're relaxed, not when we've got all the time in the world. It's when we're busy. It's when we're tired. It's when we're stressed. But brothers and sisters and young people, it is through these moments, through trial and life, that these are the moments that God shapes and molds us. And it's here where we learn whether we know how to apply the principles of the truth or not. And we've got to learn, as Zebulun and Naphtali, when the battle is on our doorstep, and when it's not, that we might give to others as we've been given by God. God has called us to respond, to assist his brethren, to fight against the enemy of sin. How are we going to respond in these moments, brothers and sisters? Young people? You see, leadership in our families and in our ecclesias, fundamentally at its heart, requires the spirit of love and self-sacrifice. That's what true leadership is. The spirit of the volunteer who says, I'll do it. Yeah, but you're busy. Yeah, I'll do it. Because I know what's needed. Here am I, send me. Because if we refuse to show care and love and respect for one another, especially our brothers and sisters who have a need that we can see, if we refuse to show that love, it's because we truly have never understood in its essence, nor yet appreciated, nor yet valued the love that we've been shown. God gave his only begotten Son. He didn't just jeopardize his life, brothers and sisters. He gave his life as a willing volunteer for us. That while we were yet sinners, he died that we might have a hope of salvation and eternal life. And it was him, brothers and sisters, that left a commandment for us, not a suggestion, not really even just a request, a commandment to love one another as he hath loved us. So the question we have to ask ourselves for exhortation that comes out of this study is, how much do you value this sacrifice? How much do we really love his example? What does his example do for us? How should it motivate us in our leadership? How does his leadership example motivate us to serve? See, only you can answer this question for yourself, but it demands a response. And it's an either-or answer, isn't it, brothers and sisters? It's your choice. But you have to make the right one. You see, we are a family where everyone has a vital leadership part to play. Because that spirit is the spirit of volunteers who serve in leadership because they truly appreciate what their God has done for them.